The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Café. This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Writer's Block Podcast NH. This is a podcast designed by writers for writers on the journey to being published. Joined Mandra Biscornet.
It was so healthy and nutritious.
Deborah Monk.
Can we open each podcast with a dance number?
Shelly Devlin.
It was so full of inspiration and sparkles.
Every Tuesday morning live on YouTube. And make sure you subscribe to catch the podcast anytime on iTunes, iHeart Radio, Podbean, Spotify, or your favorite podcast catcher. It's time to be inspired, feel empowered, and be well with the Writer's Block Podcast NH.
And welcome to the Writer's Block Podcast. I'm Mandra.
I'm Debbie.
And I'm Shelly.
Thank you for joining us here at the Writer's Block, where our mission is to inspire, empower, and to help people be well. Today on our show, we are going to welcome back Mike Miles. Mike is a host of the Friend in Recovery podcast and is a substance abuse counselor and a really just great advocate for those struggling with addiction and their families. And we're having Mike back today to talk about his own writing project, Miles of Hope. So welcome back, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
And can we just congratulate you on a wonderful title?
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it.
I wish I could take the credit, but I have to give it to a friend of mine.
That's okay. We have a saying, a good artist borrows and a great artist steals.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a work in progress for quite a while, and life comes at you pretty hard sometimes, and you get busy, and you put it on the back shelf. But I really believe there's a reason why things happen the way they do, and sometimes we got to get out of our own ways and just let karma and life just take over. And when
That's
I mean
the universe speaking.
I think so. And what I mean by that is I started this project back in the 80s, believe it or not.
Wow.
And in early recovery. And as we spoke of last week, the narrative therapy was, it was very helpful. And I had sent it off to St. Martin's Press. I couldn't think of the name last time, but and I met a gentleman there. He was very interested. He sent me a handwritten note and said, "This is a very nice piece of work." And he'd get back to me. Well, I didn't hear back from him for several months, and then I got another letter from St. Martin's Press, and of course I think I'm going to be a published author. And
Make a million.
yeah, unfortunately, the gentleman I was working with passed away. And,
When was this?
And this was back in 92. And as a result of him passing away, the new editor had said, "This is wonderful, stay at it, but right now we're not looking for more self-help,
Works.
In other words, me talking about recovery and addiction and, what I did. And, I had been a policeman for 35 years, but back then it was probably 12 or 13 years. And but as a result of being a therapist now, with all the stats I have on people that have helped over the years, young adults, mostly young males, I have so many more stats and just information I can use.
And a whole different perspective, too, that
Big
you can
time.
add to the book, to the piece.
Certainly. So,
Well, and timing's everything. Just yesterday I was reading that fiction readers have dropped by about 4%, but that the self-help section is still going strong, so now might just be the time.
yeah, I really believe, like for myself anyway, I've sat with mothers in turmoil more than I'd like to say, and it's usually mothers, it really is. And most clients that come to my office between the ages of 15 and 22, a lot of them come with their mothers, some fathers, but, percentage-wise, not many, but it's the mother that usually is hoping,
We drag them in.
Yeah, and there's no miracle cure, as we all know, for addiction, especially to what's out there nowadays. This fentanyl and opioids, and it's just difficult. And I've lost a lot of clients, which is very sad, and it's almost like self-defeating. I feel horrible when somebody passes away or commits suicide. It's not a good place to be, but.
Well, here in the Writer's Block, we with the people that are writing into our show, and as the more we talk about actually putting it out into the world that we are writers and trying to be writers, we hear from so many people that they want to be a writer, that they've started writing a book, that they have the whole book in a box under their bed.
Right.
So I think maybe we were meant to, Mike, help you bring maybe your book out into the light of the world.
I agree, and talking to Mr. Jonathan several weeks ago, and he told me that his wife was a writer, and she had a podcast, The Writer's Block, and I thought, wow, what a great name, The Writer's Block NH.
Got to have a good title. It's all about the title.
And I thought, wow, there's no coincidence. And, it's said often in recovery, there are no coincidence. Whether it's good or bad results, things happen for a reason. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited about
dusting it
getting
off
back on this. Yeah, I really am.
So who did you write it for? Did you write it for the addicts? Did you write it for the business of recovery, or did you write it for yourself?
Actually, I wrote it for myself, and I had some help. I had a woman named Schiffer Burke, Birke. She's a published author, and she's a close friend, and she helped me with my early recovery. It was actually her idea that I should put something together, and she helped me. And she had a group of that she'd meet with weekly, and they were writers, and she had like a writers like a meeting every week.
Yeah, writers group.
Writers group, exactly. Yeah. And
I've heard of those.
We have one of those. We have one
So you
of
know
those.
about those, right?
Sometimes on Thursdays.
So powerful.
So I would tell her stories, and she thought they were fabulous, and she'd put them in words, and then I'd go over it, and it was good. I had another gentleman who wrote for a local newspaper, Patrick Cook, and he works at a local college now, and he did the proofreading, and he made some changes, and he made this into a very I guess professional. I'm no great writer. I have some great ideas, but I've learned over the years writing process recordings and writing all kinds of treatment plans. I've learned to be a better writer, and but I think the direction I'd be going in now, of course, I would tell my own story of recovery and being a cop with an addiction problem back in the 80s, which there wasn't a lot. I mean, I was on World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. That's how popular the topic was, and as painful as it was probably for my family to see me, I was in recovery, but it was still me admitting that I was a cop with a drug problem. But think of that, World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. At the time, the biggest, show out there. Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah. And then I was on, Tom Bergeron had a show in Boston before he went out to Hollywood. People are talking. I was on his show. I was on the show Cops. I did a 2-week episode riding around with the producer and the cameraman and the sound man. And so I was on Cops. And again, it was all in recovery. But I just think there's a need. Especially now, there's really a need for parents to understand ways to get their kids into recovery. And, there's some interesting stories. I have some incredibly interesting, stories. I have some successes, too.
So maybe it started as a book that you were writing for yourself.
Correct.
But then with this history now of being in the field and being a substance abuse counselor, your audience could really be families.
Absolutely.
And addicts. And
from the year 2000 until currently 2018, I've saved every folder, every client I've had, and there's literally probably 1,000. And I could just pull one out of the box, and I could see the name, and I can tell you exactly. I mean, that's how much it means to me. I could tell you a lot about that individual. There's nothing that's been forgotten. But I really think that parents that are struggling, because I see them every day, I hear from them, I talk to them on the phone. If I could put something either on a DVD, a CD,
right,
in written form, I think it would be very useful and helpful, and I think it would be successful as well. I really do.
Well, and I think for parents and families, there's such a belief that it's only in our family, and it's not happening to anybody else. And a book or a DVD is going to just open that wide up and say, look, there's a lot of people in that same boat. You're not the only one feeling that shame, guilt, worry.
It allows you to bring that feeling of the AA meeting when you're up telling your story and kind of purging your soul to your audience, the meeting. Right. You're able to do that now to an international audience, really, at this point, with e-readers and how easy it is to get the message out.
Certainly.
Well, and speaking about the publishing industry, you're talking about the 90s. In those days, the only way to get a book published was to go through one of the big five.
Right.
But have you considered self-publishing?
Well, you know, I've heard more and more commercials. You know, the older you get, the less you sleep. You know, so I noticed from
He's up late at night.
from 2 to 4 in the morning, there's a lot of infomercials, and that's one of them. You know. Along with other things too, you know. But I really believe that everything happens for a reason. And you know, when I started this, I guess I was like 8 years into sobriety, a little bit less. And now here it is, 32 years later, talking, you know, decades. Yeah. And I've devoted my life, half of my life, to helping people. I get paid, you know. I'm not saying I'm some philanthropist, you know, giving it all away, but I have a sliding scale, and I do a lot of pro bono work because it's important to me. We talked last week about the steps, and you know, one of the steps, the last step in recovery, is to bring the message to other people. I don't tell everybody I sit with that I'm in the program, but there are select people that I do tell that to, and I actually take to meetings. But I really believe that somebody really struggling with a young adult that has an addiction problem, a drug problem, would get a lot out of this. I really.
What about the anonymous part of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous? How does that work? Because you're obviously vocal about your addiction, which would be the opposite of being anonymous. So how does that play in if somebody is considering going into recovery but sees you touting that you've got all these years in recovery? How does that work from the anonymous side of things?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're right in the big book, which is a book of recovery. You know, it talks about not getting too much in. I don't know how to word it, but they don't want you to. They basically say you should be careful about trying to use your recovery as a badge of honor. Now, if I was writing a book at how wonderful I am and how successful I am because of AA, I would agree with that. But I think where I'm just trying to help people, I don't really. Yeah, I don't see a problem with it at all. I think,
but you protect the people's anonymity.
Absolutely. Yeah,
not only in your book, but you don't. I've heard you tell stories where you just don't give out the person's name because you can say you were there, but you can't say someone else was there.
Very good. That's one of Ed's lines, and it's true. And you know, Ed Chaccio, and I really believe that, you know, for me, and what I've learned with the wonderful women I work with, Jane McKeon, Amy Doolin, and Kathy Dentos, is that we can give so much of ourselves, but confidentiality. If you don't have confidentiality, as Mandra knows, you have nothing. So I'm very, very selective. I have 2 contracts I have with law enforcement entities, and you know, talk about paranoid people. You know, people that carry a firearm that are looking for help. You know, they don't want to lose their jobs, and they have to feel very comfortable.
They have to be able to trust that story is going to stay with you.
And I hate to say it, but there are some therapists out there that would see a police officer or an armed individual come to their office while they were working on a break, and they wouldn't allow them in. I mean, I guess I can understand that, because if they're carrying their firearm.
I think that's where your book is important, Mike, too, because you were a pillar of the community for years, and you were kind of riding both sides of the law there with an addiction behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
And I always give that analogy that, if you knew your brain surgeon was an addict and an alcoholic, you might second guess about going under the knife. So that's where the anonymous comes in, but it's frustrating at the same time because you have an important, passionate message to share.
Right. Well, most law enforcement people are supposed to be, I guess they want them to be on a higher standard, and I can understand why society would want that, absolutely. And that's a great analogy. A doctor with a drug problem is going to operate on you. I guess I'd be a little concerned too. But I feel that I'm very confident knowing that by speaking about my own addiction, I helped a lot of other cops back in the 80s. Again, World News Tonight, Peter Jennings. All of a sudden, I didn't tell anybody that they were with me for 3 days. Girl named Beverly Jackson. She was the producer from New York. She came. She stayed in Lowell. They rode around with me. My chief was very gracious. Came to my house. We just talked about it, and I helped. As a result of that, I got so many messages from different different police departments, all the way to Washington State, down to Florida, Pennsylvania. I went and testified for a detective from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who was a undercover police officer, got caught taking cocaine out of a locker. They were going to fire him as a result of me testifying, saying that cops can recover, they can be successful and come back, even tenfold. He got to keep his job, and it's an 18-page decision by a judge, and my name was in it. It kind of made me like an expert witness, which was good because if I had been sober and then not stayed with it and then jumped back on, but continued sobriety for a longest period as I have been, I don't feel like AA is just one of the methods that I would talk about, but I would never divulge anyone else's name.
Right. And what has it been like for you getting back into the writing? Because we've talked about before writing memoirs, what sort of like feelings, emotions maybe has the writing process brought up?
That's a great point. And when I'm writing a treatment plan or say someone comes to me for anger management, they were arrested for domestic violence, and the courts want them to get a 8-hour block of anger management. So I sit with an individual, and the work itself is a little strenuous sometimes.
Yeah. We only have 8 hours. You're trying to get insurance to pay for that.
Yeah. And you try to do the best you can. And, behavior modification is not magic. It's real. And but I really believe that when I'm sitting and writing their treatment plan afterwards, when I'm putting the summary together, I feel this is where I shine because I understand the emotional part. I understand the dynamics of the courts. I've been to court 1,000 times testifying. I understand the victim. I've cradled victims. I've taken victims to the emergency room in an ambulance. So I understand the whole dynamic of it. So if somebody comes and they think they're just going to, come in and half-ass it, so to speak, it's not going to happen. And I have the power to make them do further therapy and such. But I've been very fortunate that I think with my knowledge and my ability and my desire, I've been able to send them back with some good results. But for me, sitting down writing, that it's cathartic for me. It's comfortable. I enjoy it. At one time, I hated writing when I was in school. I'd be like, it was so strenuous, these 17-page papers. I'd rather dig a ditch with a spoon, like, what the heck? But yeah, so I can see where, that passion has been awoken, and I want to get this done. I don't know how many years I got left. The average life expectancy of a white male is it's actually gone down because of this epidemic. It's gone down considerably, almost 2 years. It used to be 80. It's like 78 now, a little under 78 years. And I'm hoping to, I get another good 16 years. Yeah.
We'll get you cracking. Well, let's get this book out. We got to get going to get this book out, right? Debbie's release is in the summer. We'll have you done by fall.
Sounds good. I can't wait to see Deb's. That paragraph you read 2 weeks ago, Deborah, was so powerful that last week was so powerful that I got so many hits on that. Everybody was saying, wow, that was one paragraph. I'm like, it was one paragraph.
Tell our listeners what paragraph you read.
Oh, Lord. I
don't know if you have it, but it's from Well Behaved.
No, it's not from it's from my memoir. So it's a true story about my dad.
Yeah.
I don't think
she
I
was
have
it was about her, her dad and the way he meted out punishment, and she didn't feel like she was the lucky one.
Oh, right. I was the lucky one.
Yeah.
Right.
You were the lucky one.
And I was saying how I didn't, my father there was a lot of abuse in my family, but I was the lucky one because I wasn't hit. But the reality was I was hit in the dark when I was asleep, and somehow I didn't count that. Right. And so by writing that, I started with the intellectual thought process of I was the lucky one. And by the time when I saw it on paper and I read it, I just thought, oh, that's, it counts if you're being hit while you're asleep. Yeah. And then the message was, the bruises weren't really the important part. The important part was hide the bruises. So I don't really care that you have bruises. What I care about is that you don't let anybody else know you have bruises. Right. So. Yeah,
that was very powerful. Very, it was extremely, because people that know me, I told them that I sent them that podcast, and close, family members and such. My oldest daughter being one of them, and everybody just they found such power in that. It was really well written, and very emotional, but something you would take with you, you know.
And something that people need to understand is Deb is she is a writer. This is what she's done for certainly as long as I've known her, but for much longer than that. You don't have to be, in quotes, good at writing to use writing as a tool to purge your soul of things that are bothering you. I find often just putting it on paper. I have a friend that'll probably listen to this podcast, and I was talking to her about Deb's appearance on your show, Mike, and she said to me that when things are really bothering her, she'll write it down on paper and then set them on fire and watch the wind take the ashes away. Because some things seem so insurmountable, but if the fire can consume that thing, the paper becomes that thing subconsciously. So the fire consumes that, and now you know in your heart of hearts that there is something more powerful than those feelings, even if it isn't you yet. Right. So you don't have to be, in quotes again, good at it, but to do it is often just taking that first step is the best step. Maybe hardest, but.
And I think I would be the first one to admit that I don't consider myself a good writer. I don't even know that I ever really want to be called a good writer. I think of myself more as a real writer. I try to be raw. I try to be honest. I use kind of Melissa Etheridge as my singing
muse almost
shadow self or something.
Okay.
I don't think of her as really the best singer in the world, but God, she's raw and she's real, and I love her singing. And so I think of that's how I want to write. That's what I aim to be, more real and raw and honest and open than I do to be good. I don't think I'm good. I don't even know that I ever really want to be good.
You think you're good?
Is boring.
You're good.
I think you're great.
Pretty good.
Well, that's probably what makes you so good. No ego.
But your book is going to do that in
a different way.
In a different way, is bring that to a wider audience. It's going to be raw. I'm assuming going to be brutally honest.
But you're not writing it as a writer. You're writing it as a former addict and former alcoholic who actually has something to say.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, to too many people.
But has this amazing perspective of being in it, and then so many years of sobriety, and on the treatment side of things where you've...
And on the law enforcement side. Correct. So a whole other side.
Right.
There's some exciting, there really are some exciting moments in there that, when I look back, of course, statute of limitations being up, that, but, there were times when, it just was it was dangerous. It was dangerous to even go to work, so I wouldn't, And in the first 5 years of my career, I never called in sick. I was a shining star. I loved it.
So
I
then
didn't
what
want to miss anything. I don't really know. I went to Atlantic City with a friend of mine. He owned a nightclub, and I did cocaine for the first time. I was 30 years old, and I just fell in love with it. It took away all my doubts, fears, insecurities. It didn't make me boisterous or extremely outgoing, although it did take away my insecurities. I was kind of a shy kid, I don't know why I was, but I was. I spent 3 years in the Army. I saw a lot. I was a military police officer, and it was the time, 72 to 75, when the busing situation was going on in Boston. There was a lot of racial strife over in Europe as well. Vietnam veterans coming back from Vietnam, black and white nightclubs. They had their own.
Racial tensions.
Oh, awful. And I don't know. I consumed all these behaviors. I got out of the Army at 21, which is just a kid. I had a couple of children. One of my children passed away. He was 3 months old, and it was a very difficult time. And I can't blame any one specific thing. I didn't drink that much. I didn't smoke a lot, but I did cocaine. I was in Atlantic City, and it just clicked, and I loved it. And it almost killed me. I mean, I went from having a lot of money in the bank and a good, successful life, and to being just a paranoid, mess. I just didn't want to leave the house. And when I went to work, I had loads of guilt because I was working with cops that were cleaning a city up in the 80s, probably one of the biggest cities for crack cocaine, which I never tried crack, but these cops putting their lives on the line, and here I am. I had a friend that had quite a bit of access to cocaine. He was a professional, so it wasn't like I had to go buy it off us in a seedy area, which doesn't make it any better, but it certainly made it look a lot more attractive to me. Absolutely,
made it easier because you had that.
I'd go to his house, leave money on his dresser, and off I'd go.
Right.
And but it changed my personality beyond anybody who I thought I was, and it gave me a lot of, a lot of problems, but yeah.
Well, we are excited about your writing project, and thank you so much for coming on and talking about it with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so again, it's Mike Miles of the Friends in Recovery podcast, working on Miles of Hope.
Miles of Hope.
And thank you for listening. Please check out the Writer's Block NH Facebook and the Writer's Block podcast. May you be inspired, feel empowered, and be well.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Café, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.